as part of the Laudato Si Reflection Day. In this event, in this day, we are exploring at how different generations of movements are facing the ecological challenges and looking for ways into sustainability. My name is Adriana Opromolla. I am a Senior Officer for Ecology at the Secretariat of JESC, the Jesuit European Social Center. And it is my pleasure to be part of this session as your moderator. This session is discussing and exploring the issue of biodiversity. In this session, we would like to discuss biodiversity from two perspectives which are different but complementary. From the Catholic perspective and from the EU policy perspective. Our goal is to explore how protecting biodiversity is and should always be a common endeavor for all living people on the planet, and it is embedded in our Catholic faith. The threats faced by our ecosystems today are so humongous that they need all of us to work collaboratively to create sustainable living conditions for all and for present and future generations. We will explore how the public policies of the European Union align with faith-oriented values and choices, and how the Catholic faith and public policies can inspire one another to reach the common objective of protecting our natural resources and foster culture-based solutions in Europe and beyond. Now, the Encyclical Laudato Si is talking about biodiversity quite substantially. First of all, because it says that never have we so hurt and mistreated our common home as we have in the last 200 years. But it also, at the same time, states that we have been called to be instruments of God, our Father, so that our planet might be what He desired when He created. The book of Genesis invites us to till and keep the garden of the world, while taking from the bounding of the earth whatever we need for subsistence. We must exercise responsibility and care for its resources. The Encyclical, therefore, identifies the problem of the excessive use of natural resources within the context of ethics in international relations, and in the light also of the ecological debt accumulated by the countries of the global north vis-à-vis those of the global south. And we think of the extraction of raw materials, which causes pollution. And so does the use of developing countries for landfills and the dumping of toxic waste, the depletion of soil and natural biodiversity, deforestation of large areas of the planet, water pollution and the devastation of our landscapes ought to weigh on the conscience of those who exploit our common home. Now, I would like to then really turn to our speakers of today, who will share their work and experience, and they will also give us precious food for thought based on their reflections on Laudato Si and Evangelii Gaudium, as well as the Catholic and the relevant Catholic social teaching. I would thus like to introduce the first of our speaker, Mrs. Emmy Woolen Echeverria. Emmy has served the Catholic Church for over 25 years as an international missionary. She is currently serving as the International Justice, Peace and Integrity of Creation Coordinator for Columban Missionaries and co-coordinator of the Ecology Task Force of the Vatican Commission on COVID-19. In recent years, she's been founding member of international networks and projects such as the Laudato Si Movement, the Ecclesial Network for the Pan-Amazon, the Rivers Above Asia and Oceania Ecclesial Network, and the Catholic Nonviolence Initiative. Emmy holds a master's in spirituality with an emphasis on ecotheology. It is my pleasure then to give you the floor, Emmy, and please remember you have 15 minutes to give us an overview of your experience. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Adriana. It's such a pleasure to be here with you, with Angelo, and with all of the participants in the retreat day. A special word of thanks also to Cinzia for the invitation to join you. It's a pleasure to be zooming in from Washington, DC. So I'd like to share my screen, and if you can just give me a moment to situate, excuse me, my screen. So like I said, I thank you again. It is a real pleasure to be here, and the theme in particular of two generations, one journey, I think is so inspiring and echoes a message from Pope Francis of hearing the cry of the earth and the cry of people is in fact two expressions of one cry. And so, you know, I think it's true that in this journey of seeking for health and well-being for all people in the planet, we have many generations, past, present, and future. And indeed, it is multiple voices coming together for one purpose. So I'd like to begin with Pope Francis, as we usually do. And in Laudato Si, he makes a specific call to heed the word of young people. He says in Laudato Si, young people demand change. Let us hear their cry and embark on a journey of new dialogue about how we are shaping the future of our planet. We need a conversation which includes everyone and creation itself. And my experience with young people, particularly in faith-based advocacy, is that young people are really thrilled to know, to hear and experience a church that is engaged in these common themes to humanity and the planet: care for biodiversity, climate change, migration. All of these are interwoven for sure. And in particular, I'd like to share with you about the COP15 and the Convention on Biological Diversity. And in particular, the role that the church and young people have been playing in that process. So I'd like to begin with an overview of the timeline for the Convention on Biological Diversity. Very briefly, we were anticipating that COP15 was going to happen in 2020. Who could have known that the pandemic was coming? And so the purpose of the convention was to review in 2020 the past 10 years of work and the targets that were established in Aceh in 2010. So it was a time of evaluation and projecting for the next 10 years. Things were happening, people were meeting, negotiations were happening, and then 2020 came, and as much of the world experienced a pause in the work. But then things began to pick up again, and in August 2021, there was a virtual consultation of observers and the parties themselves. Then in October 2021, it was part one of the Convention on Biological Diversity, part one of the summit. Part two is to be in Kunming. At this time, we're still not sure when. Following that, you'll see in March, there was an in-person conversation with the CBD, the parties and observers, which was the first time that we met in over 2 years. So that was a really important time for face-to-face negotiations, particularly the global framework on biodiversity, and which is setting the targets, and then also around implementation. From that meeting, because it wasn't, they weren't able to get through all the material, another meeting has been set for Nairobi in June. So we're preparing for that. Nestled in between March and June is Laudato Si Week, which is our 7th anniversary of Laudato Si. So there's some news that I want to share with you about that. And then finally, looking to the top of the shoots there, we are looking forward to Season of Creation and hopefully the final summit in Kunming. So that's just a brief timeline of where we've been over the last, say, 18 months. I'd like to share with you that the experiences that we're inviting the entire church to is in these 4 areas of spirituality, advocacy, community organizing and development, and education. And you'll see, hopefully, in the following portion of the presentation that each of these areas are in some way reflected in the work that's happening in the church. So I'll begin with the Vatican. And in 2021, flowing from Laudato Si and the messages about biodiversity, the dicastery took up biodiversity as a key theme within the overall work of message of Laudato Si. And in April 2021, a high-level dialogue was held between Cardinal Turkson, head of the dicastery for integral human development, and Jane Goodall. At that time, Cardinal Turkson said this. He said, "The church is raising her prophetic voice to provide a spiritual basis for reflection on the protection of biodiversity." So this was really a public moment where the church kind of laid its weight on the importance of biodiversity and our work for example, engaging in the CBD process and preparing for COP15 in the way the church has been really active in COP26. In March, when the parties were gathered, the CBD gathered in Geneva, the Holy See submitted a message to the parties. And part of that message delivered what says this: "These frameworks invite individual Catholics and Catholic organizations to participate in a journey of transformation and concrete action towards living sustainably with creation." So again, a very clear message from the church that we are committed to engaging in biodiversity, and a real call for the parties to see the church as a partner and a collaborator in the work ahead. So I'd like to move now to our own Columban experience, my personal organization. As missionaries living in many countries in the world, we see the challenges that people are faced with biodiversity collapse and other environmental concerns. And so 2 years ago, we started a podcast series linking biodiversity and a number of different themes. And these are just some of them. So each episode for our biodiversity series is biodiversity and another topic. So biodiversity and youth, biodiversity and economics, and so forth. So that we're weaving those threads together and hearing the voices of youth, hearing the voices of migrants, hearing the voices of indigenous peoples, and local communities in their struggle for and their success in caring for biodiversity. And then I'd like to just highlight too the work of the Laudato Si movement, and in particular a petition that has been circulating for over a year now, and we certainly encourage you, if you haven't already, to endorse this petition, Healthy Planet, Healthy People. And it's a complementary petition between the UNFCCC and the biodiversity process. Also want to lift up the wonderful work of the Laudato Si generation, which is the youth component of the Laudato Si movement. So lots of leadership and enthusiasm happening in those spaces too. Another element that I'd like to mention that we've been collaborating with is other faith traditions. And so a group formed about this time last year to prepare feedback to the CBD on the biodiversity framework, the global biodiversity framework. And here you can see the 6 key points that we wanted to raise in terms of policy. We think they're consistent with our Catholic message and also with a wider faith voice. So the web of life, seeing the integral and integrated connections with all of life. When one part of the body is wounded, the entire body feels it. Ambition, we know that the call to these conventions to be really ambitious in their commitments, national commitments for caring for creation. We talked about the cross-cutting nature of issues. So linking biodiversity and climate change, for example, was really important. We talked about the rights-based approach. So nature rights, human rights, making sure that there really is an emphasis on the human and natural world as having their own integral value, intrinsic value, excuse me. Production and extraction was another area. So that's all around the circular economy, kind of challenging the CBD to move away from an extractive model of economy towards a circular model. And then finally, the implementation, that this is one of the criticisms with ACE is that there was great targets, but implementation was weak. And so here again, there is a strong call in our message for having mechanisms for proper implementation. I just want to share with you, if we have time, a brief video of youth, the Global Youth Biodiversity Network, which some of you may be aware of or connected to. At the conference in Geneva, the youth constituency had a very strong, clear, prophetic, creative voice. And so I just want to check with you, Adriana, do we have time for maybe a 5-minute video? And if not, we can share the link and people can watch it on their own time.
I would say, I think we can share it. We can share the link and then people can watch the video later on.
Okay, that's great. So, but just I think the important message to share is that the youth contingency at the conference was very well organized and delivered some really powerful messages that made all of the parties really sit up and take notice. And I'll conclude with a very personal message from a 5th grader from Birmingham, England. One of the things that Columbans did in preparation for the Geneva round of negotiations was we were in communication with an elementary school, and we invited the students to write a message to delegates from the UK to the CBD. And so I'd like to close with these words from Felicity, who is a 5th grader. And she writes this. We hope the CBD meetings go well. Here in Birmingham, we love our environment and hope that it can be restored to its natural beauty. I have stuck an image of a black redstart at the top of the page. It prefers urban environments, but has declined in numbers massively. I hope that one day, no species will be under threat of extinction. But this will only have a possibility of happening if we take action now. Our environment and Earth are relying on you to help make a change. If you could please change guidelines to rules, this would change massively. Please help us make a change. Felicity. And what more powerful message can we receive, a call to action, than from Felicity, 10 years old. And so we join our voices and our work with young people, and we celebrate the contributions that the young generation are making to these really important processes. So I'll leave it there, turn it back to you, Adriana. Thank you again. It's been such a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Emmy. It's been really a refreshing, exposure to receive these final words, indeed, from such a young yet aware student. Yeah, this is actually where the messages become most touching, most compelling. So thanks very much for sharing that. It's been very interesting to hear from you about the work of the Catholic Church in very different areas, such as spirituality, advocacy, community organization, education, in its prophetic role as an institution, but also as through its networks in various arenas. And the policy making arena is the most notable one you have discussed, you have told about to protect our biodiversity, hopefully shifting from guidelines to compelling rules which would ensure a certain degree of protection. So thank you very much again. And the youth, yes, not to forget the substantial and really exhorting role of youth today, which is well aware and enthusiastic about getting engaged. So thank you very much. Now I would like to give the floor to Angelo Salsi, Mr. Angelo Salsi, our second speaker in the order of intervention. Mr. Salsi comes from Bolzano and has studied agricultural sciences at the University of Bologna. In Italy, he started his career as an agrometeorologist, as the guy who tells the farmers which way the wind will blow, as he says. It was a great job, which he loved and still misses today. That's his words. But things must change. So he arrived in Brussels in 1992, and ever since he has been dedicated to the protection of nature conservation and biodiversity, especially since he started working for the LIFE program, selecting and financing projects covering all possible environmental aspects. A great opportunity for him to learn and stay in touch with the territory, sometimes something he greatly appreciates. He's always on the front line, helping member states and all stakeholders to protect Europe's natural heritage and the wider biodiversity we are part of. And as of April 2021, both the LIFE program and Angelo have found a new home, the new European Climate, Infrastructure and Environment Executive Agency, the CINEA, where Angelo has recently been appointed head of department D, Natural Resources, Climate, Sustainable Blue Economy, and Clean Energy. So, Angelo, welcome in this session with us. Thank you for accepting to speak. And you also have 15 minutes to present your experience concerning biodiversity. The floor is yours.
Thanks, Adriana. And beautiful introduction by Emmy, really. It's nice to see things from different angles. Why do I say that? Because obviously we are sort of the public body in a certain way, and we are driven by a machine which is more, how can I say, more fundamentally anchored to very practical elements, and we frequently miss the opportunity to stay put for a moment, take a bit of fresh air and look at things from a more ethical and moral angle. Still, I think we've done in this particular area of biodiversity not a bad job overall. If you look at the European Union, we were not called at the time like that, but the European, the EC, the European Community, in before. Right after the Stockholm Convention, and then after the Rio Convention, in the early 80s, we started thinking that we should do something to indeed promote practically, not only with nice words and nice policy documents, the conservation of nature underground. So to do this, we did a couple of things. The first one is 1979, we had a first legal base, which was called the Birds Directive. And it's interesting because the Birds Directive, I've been told, I was not there at the time, so I only tell you things that I've heard. And apparently the Birds Directive was pretty much driven by a moral type of pulsion, which was in the heart of Germans that hated hunters that were killing and capturing the little birds everywhere else in Europe, typically in Southern Europe, but not only. There were other countries which had a more, if you want, consolidated and turbulent hunting environment, which were not so happy about this concept, but hop, the Birds Directive comes in April 1979 in place, and it protects de facto all wild birds that live even part of their life in Europe. Not one particular species, it protects all of them. So I'm sorry for the chickens, we don't protect them, and but we protect all the others, and I can tell you there are a lot, and they have a lot of troubles. These poor animals. Why did we start with birds? Yeah, probably because of that, which had a certain moral element in it, because it's not really driven by economic reasoning. We didn't start protecting birds because we could make a fortune out of birds, wild birds, or things like that. Yes, of course, there were also economic activities around birds. There were birds that were sold, wild birds were sold because they were singing well, wild birds because they were sold to breed them in captivity and later on sell the birds to my old mother, who had a little bird in the house, to talk with the bird because she didn't have anybody else to talk with. But apart from that, I think it was a lot of ethical and moral elements that drove that first piece of legislation. So probably we did not do it explicitly by mentioning these elements, but the drive was there. So I think this is already a recognition of the fact that the policymaker in Brussels, in a way or another, they do internalize, if you want, certain ethical and moral elements in their activities. The second thing we did was in 92, it happened the same day, on 21st of May, we said, okay, the Birds Directive protect the birds, what about the other species? And so we developed and finally adopted on the 21st of May, the Habitats Directive, which completes, if you want, the picture. In this case, we didn't have the, if you want, the courage or the ambition to protect all the other wild animals and plants. So we selected, if you want, a certain number of them that we considered Europe had a particular responsibility for. But still, it's a very long list. And we included also what we call the habitat types, which is the ecosystems where all the wild animals and plant species they live. So at the end of the day, we did protect pretty much the rest of the biodiversity that we had to protect. And the interesting thing is, in that moment, in one of the articles, we said, okay, to ensure this protection, we have to identify and protect the sites which are worth the effort of protection, and they contribute to the overall responsibility of the EU in terms of biodiversity protection. And we did this in a very scientific way. I can tell you it was because I was part of the exercise. Obviously, there were a lot of pressures and pulsions coming from all possible economic sector, because when they started realizing that we were starting to put in a certain way under, I wouldn't say a glass dome, but putting certain barriers around sites which were pieces of land that you could identify in the continent, they started thinking, what about if I want to build a new highway? What about my new hotel over there? And so on and so on. And so obviously there were a lot of pressures, but we said, okay, we want to see which are the sites that are definitely for scientific purposes needed to protect this species, that species, and so on. And we succeeded creating the largest network of protected areas in the world, still today. The Chinese promised that they will beat us, but for the moment they have not yet achieved it. And this is Natura 2000 with more than 27,000 sites, 18% of the EU land territory. So it's a big chunk of land, really. And the same day, on the 21st of May, we invented also the LIFE program. So we said, okay, fine, great to design policies, great to tell the countries that compose the EU, you have to do this, you have to do that, but we must also show that we are a real partner in this particular game. We're not only the policy writer. And so we set up a financial mechanism, which is a typical kind of response that public administration has in order to rebalance what we have in our hands. We usually have a stick. So we bring, for example, member states to court if they don't perform well. And on the other side, we wanted to put a carrot. The carrot, to be frank with you, was very small in terms of amount of money compared to the ambition we had. But we used it for 30 years in such a smart way. And I think this is the results of a rather interesting chemical alchemy that happened, that we managed to make sure that Natura 2000, the largest network of protected areas in the world, without the Little Life program, would not be the way it is. Now, during this journey that we traveled through, and I had the pleasure to embark in 1994, so I didn't see the LIFE program coming to life, but I saw it when it was a little baby, and I've been escorting it through its traveling until now, which is turning 30. So everybody says life begins at 30. So let's say life of life maybe begins at 30. So it's good for the future of the program. I have seen in an infinite number of occasions the elements that Emmy was trying to describe. This kind of moral, ethical, religious drive that pushes human beings to do things that do not really have by themselves an immediate economic value or an immediate material return for the people who do it. Apart from the pleasure of doing, the passion of doing it, and possibly a salary which is paid to some of these people that are doing these things. And so much that the people I've seen in this LIFE project, in particular in what we call the nature projects, but also in other projects, So much that we have come to a point where we started calling the Little Life program not anymore the Life program, but the People's program. Why? Because it goes down really to the level of communities. So we have been financing projects where you would have a municipality engaged in the project of 3,000 people. So someone that would probably never dare entering into the machinery of protecting nature at the level of projects which are worth millions of euros in terms of investment, but they were partner in the project. We had the shepherds working in an area that were angry as you could be, because wolves were coming back in the area where they had been hunted out maybe 50 or 60 or 100 years ago. They were not used anymore to that, and they were complaining. We embarked them on those projects in the journey. We didn't succeed in getting all of them on the side of the poor wolf, like Francis did, but we did manage to get a lot of them. We had fishermen that were on the one side the one polluting the sea, and on the other side the one experiencing the pollution in the sea. Think about plastic. A lot of the plastic is coming from the boats, from the fishermen's vessels. At the same time, a lot of the plastic is collected in the nets of the fishermen that clearly don't throw their nets in the sea to collect plastic. So all these small communities, they popped up sometimes anecdotically, sometimes frequently in a more, how can I say, structural way. Up to the level where we reached a point where we said, okay, now we will publish a book, a brochure, where we want to give the voice to the people of life. And we started interviewing these people, including the people on the ground. We had prisoners in jail that contributed to Life Project. Can you think about? I met one of those guys. He was sent to jail for 30 years. Which is equivalent almost to perpetuity, if you want, at least in the legal system in Italy, it's probably the longest period you can get. And this guy had no future in front of him, whatever he did before. But engaged in this Life project, the guy started seeing some light during his day. And I met the guy, we talked about it, and I felt that it was important for this person, and it was important for the Life project itself. Then we had, I recently visited a monastery, nuns monastery in the southern part of France. They are owner of a rather large site, which they have decided to dedicate completely to Natura 2000. So they went to the public administration and they said, I want my property to become part of Natura 2000. And these nuns, now they are engaged in a Life project. You should see their faces. It's lovely to see these smiles from ear to ear, and to meet these people, which we, let's say, from our Brussels-centric type of logic, we frequently don't think about these kind of stakeholders. We always think about the usual suspects, and this is not the first time. Let's talk about food waste and Caritas involvement in many Life projects. But it's just to mention how close we can get to the dimension of the Laudato Si without really, how can I say, embedding this explicitly in our narrative. And even before Laudato Si came out. So when Laudato Si came out, I can tell you that I was witnessing in the corridors of the Commission, especially in the place where I was working, obviously DG Environment, we were a bit better placed, if you want, in that sense. There was really a turmoil. The people were talking about it. It was the first time in 30 years working in the Commission that I heard normal officials of the European Commission talking as an everyday coffee chat about a piece of paper written by the Pope. It had never happened before. So it's frankly something that has marked a change. And now you find even in higher level policy, like in the Green Deal, if you look at it, when they talk about the transition, the ecological transition, they talk about the just ecological transition. We don't want to leave the ones that cannot buy the electric car behind. We want everyone to come with us. And this is what, if you look at Laudato Si, the message is written maybe with slightly different words, but it's the same. So there is so much commonalities between the two approaches. And I think the message from the Pope or from the Orthodox Patriarch goes pretty much in the same line. It gives us that kind of packaging, if you want, that we need to also take the time, as I said at the beginning, to sit down, relax for a moment from our daily routine and say, wow, but this is bigger than just what I do. It's part of a bigger thing. Adriana, back to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Angelo. You have been perfectly timely, because I was exactly about to tell you that we need to wrap up your intervention, but you were perfect on time. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Well, yes, it's been also very rewarding and very encouraging to hear that throughout its public role as an EU institution, the CINEA and also the Commission in its own regulatory role is capable to become a prophetic actor, even without putting a name on it, but you know, reproducing and you know, reproposing the messages or the meaning of the message of Laudato Si, and this emphasis on just ecological transition, which we so much need today. I need to take you through the second part of our exchange, which consists of each of you having wished to comment a specific paragraph in one of the encyclicals that are relevant to today's topic, with your own comments, your own words. So, but please, let's now be brief. We don't have so much time left, so I would really like to invite you to contain your comment in maybe 3 minutes each. So, Emmy, I would like to ask you to give us, to give us your view about this quote of the Evangelii Gaudium, whereby time is greater than space. Please.
Thanks so much, Adriana, and thank you, Angelo, for your sharing. Listening to you, Angelo, especially reinforces for me this message from Evangelii Gaudium: time is greater than space. Pope Francis talks about this tension that we are constantly poised between this individual moment and the utopian horizon to which we're drawn. And I think what I was hearing you share, Angelo, was how through your work, you are creating space and process for people to address real needs in their communities, protections, but also with that longer view, the long view beyond our own lifetimes of setting into motion processes that will continue to protect and care for biodiversity. And I just think as we continue to journey with Laudato Si, that it's important for us to also hold that balance between this moment, the challenges that we have now, and also the ability to see where past journeys have taken us to new horizons and where we're moving forward. And so to not, I think what Pope Francis is saying is, do not be discouraged. There are limitations and there's grace in limitations. It invites creativity because we must see things in a different way. And so perhaps it's a little bit odd to make reference to Vangeli Gaudium in the context of a Laudato Si retreat. But I do think that this message of, this invitation that Pope Francis is delivering to us, whether it's care for the earth or other concerns that we have as a church, to be grounded in this real moment and the cries and the challenges that we have in this particular moment, but not to lose sight of that deep journey, the long journey that we're all walking together and far beyond ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Emmy. Thank you very much for this reflection, which is certainly, deepening our own attitude on how to protect biodiversity. Indeed, having such kind of reflection just beyond our, concrete action is so very necessary in our inspiration to stick to our inspiration. So it is now the turn of Angelo, who also has chosen to comment a paragraph from Laudato Si, whereby Pope Francis is saying that caring for ecosystems demands farsightedness and that there are no quick and easy solutions. Can you please tell us in 3 minutes, more or less, what that means? Thank you.
It's. I think the two statements are quite interconnected, and I like very much the way Emmy presented the first reflection. And I can offer you a practical example of within our own limitations, if you want, the way we are foresighted, the way we look for the future and not only for today. And we finance projects, for example, on species like Margaritifera margaritifera. Do you know what's that? That's the shellfish that produces pearl, but in the rivers. So it's the Pearl River mussels, if you want, in English. This poor animal, this shellfish, has a biology that provides that becomes reproductive around between 20 and 30 years of age. So we financed the reintroduction of juveniles of the species in rivers, which means that we will see the results, if any, in 30 years from now. Now, in terms of a public institution like we are, this is almost like saying we are working for the future, but really the future. So it gives you the feeling of the courage we have. We sign grant agreements that last 10 years. I can tell you that our budget people, they dislike totally this kind of attitude. But this gives you the feeling that in practical terms, within the poor humans that we are and our ability to think and project ourselves in the future, we do our best indeed to commit and take risks that go over and beyond even our little lifetime. And I can use I can abuse one statement that my previous commissioner Janusz Potocznik did some time ago when we were talking about the value of environment, because the statement by Pope Francis goes on and also talks about what is the intrinsic value of and the possible losses that we have from non-action, if you want. And Janusz said, well, if you think that environment doesn't matter, which might be a fair personal point of view, well, stop breathing while you're counting money. And then you tell me. And I think that if you're very, very rich, I think you will immediately see the point from Janusz. So that's another thing that I was recently asked, which goes a bit in that direction as well, is give me an argument now to protect, if you want, the what we have set as biodiversity targets in the Green Deal. Because now the present crisis, obviously, with the war in Ukraine, everything is pushing into a completely different direction. So the argument is that everybody is pointing at the biodiversity crisis as the largest mass extinction that we have. And it's worse, even though the people don't have the figures or the understanding, it's worse than the climate crisis. So more than that, I mean, what more do you want if you are the one driving society into the future to be able to do your job correctly? I know that this is obviously nice to say, but difficult then to put into a negotiation, but let's hope that it might work here and there.
Okay, yes, let's hope so, indeed. Thank you, Angelo. Yeah, thanks for giving us your perspective on this, indeed, big challenge of, farsightedness, what that really means. And actually, I would like to, since we have a few more minutes for a little bit of a debate, it's going to be among the three of us. So I would like to bring this point forward about farsightedness, exactly, and about risk. What you have just mentioned, Angelo, in your comment, indeed, sometimes policymakers have to have the courage to take risks. So I would like to ask both of you just to give me your opinion on what now needs to happen, because there will be a new, an upcoming sessions of negotiation, as Emmy has shown. There will be, preparation session to the COP15 plenary, and then so at UN level. So what are the current hurdles? Sorry, and where is that? We don't see yet such a farsightedness and such a courage. And so what needs to change in order to advance, to see progress? And also from the EU perspective, indeed, Angelo, as you have said, the risk now is that the current crisis, the war, the military crisis, may put on halt the European Green Deal and what was projected to be the response of the European Union to the climate and biodiversity crisis. So I would like to just raise two really main current challenges for both of you to give us your views, and so that we can conclude our conversation today with a word of caution for sure, but also a word of hope. Where do we see the lights of hope? Thank you. Yes, I see you're ready.
Yeah. So two things. Thank you for that, Adriana. Two things come to my mind in terms of hurdles, at least in the CBD process and the negotiations for COP15. One, I was very struck in Geneva by, on the one hand, I think there was a genuine, authentic desire for the parties and observers to really have at the heart the good of care for biodiversity. And yet, it is still clear to see how isolated, how siloed messages can be and efforts can be. And so, I think this challenge of countries and stakeholders to have a truly holistic vision of what care for biodiversity really means, just the multi-dimensional needs that care for biodiversity has. And so if we can, as in the Catholic tradition we have of the common good, care of the common good, can put aside personal agendas, national agendas for the common good, I think that would do much. And then secondly is the implementation. We know that wonderful targets can be set, but without the tools for countries to implement their strategic plans, their national strategic plans, we will just continue as is, despite the powerful words maybe from a framework. And so I think those are two key areas that, you know, there really needs to be in the church's tradition, you know, the ecological conversion, the turning of the heart towards the common good. So I think those are two challenges, but they also, as all challenges are, they're also opportunities for transformation and for justice. You know, the call of implementation, having, you know, who's responsible financially, for example, for what it will take to really address these needs. And so, and I think from a hope perspective, you know, youth, women, indigenous communities, local communities, other NGOs and the church, you know, faith-based organizations, really staying with the process. I was very encouraged by that.
Thank you, Emmy. Yes, please go ahead, Angelo.
If I may, I think probably the recipe to make all this international negotiation become more, how can I say, impactful, would be to marry completely the two big theme, which is climate change on the one side and biodiversity on the other side. Why? Because first, from a very practical point of view, climate change has done the big jump from being a nice talking among a group of scientists to become really a policy driver and de facto an economic driver, financially and economically, if you want, while biodiversity has not. So biodiversity has the ability to influence policy, but frankly, in the economy, you don't see much of it. So by putting them together, you would use the wagon, the train that is already up and running of the other. And by putting them together, you mutually reinforce, because the drivers for climate change, most of them, if not, I wouldn't say all of them because it's probably too much, but most of them are the same drivers as the loss of biodiversity. And the conservation of biodiversity is the same kind of drivers to make sure that you get rid of the problem of climate change, or at least mitigate it. Take one, the way we eat, just one of the many. I don't know how many billion people we are currently. We have, say, 1 billion people in India that are still eating mostly vegetarian. And while countries like Brazil has become the biggest eat meter in the world, the Chinese are coming up. So every time a country moves away from a state of economic underdevelopment to a state of economic development, there are positives, but there are also apparently a number of negatives, including the way we change our diet. And to produce all this meat, we have to use a lot of land in a very ineffective way in energy terms, and just to feed the largest biodiversity that we have in the world, which is chickens, so poultry, if you want, pigs, cows, and a few other, and sheep and a few other animals. They make up 90% of the animals that we have on the planet. And they use, I don't remember what are the figures. We address this, we solve in one go a big chunk of the problems of biodiversity and of climate change. So let's, instead of having a COP biodiversity and a COP climate, we put them together. We save a lot of money, by the way, because there are thousands of people that are going to those COPs, and we get 2 pigeons with 1 shot. And we make sure that, because the classical question is, okay, lions disappear, or wolves are not there, or the wild bee XYZ, or the wild bird is extinct, goes extinct, and so what for me? People don't get it, don't grasp it. So we can spend the next 10 years to make sure that everybody understands, like we did for climate change. It took us 25 years to get from the first IPCC to a COP that would really deliver something. or we can go straight into the business and say, no, we now politically and internationally, we put them together and we merge them into one single file.
Thank you, Angelo. Yes, indeed, it's a very ambitious shift that you are advocating for, but indeed it makes a lot of sense. Yes, this, this silos approach, in fact, is not conducive, and really Laudato Si and the integral ecology concept exactly tells us that the silos approach is no longer useful to tackle such interconnected and interdependent challenges indeed. So I would like to thank you both, our speakers. It's been a very enriching session, in fact, about reading, today's public policies, in particular the EU role in the light of Laudato Si and integral ecology. Hearing also the work of the church and its networks in accomplishing this ecological conversion, which we are all aiming for, and in particular today's young generations. It's been really a pleasure to host you today. We have to now close this session for the continuation of this Laudato Si Reflection Day. So that was all for today on biodiversity. Thank you very much again. Thanks for being with us, and see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.